All right, I'm Jim Adovasio. I'm an archaeologist at Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania. I have done archaeological work all over the world. Most recently, we're working offshore in the Gulf of Mexico looking for submerged sites on the continental shelf.
And what is your book?
This book is The First Americans. It is about the initial peopling of the New World. It explores the history, the controversy about who the first Americans were, where they may have derived, how they may have gotten here, and most vexatiously, when did this initial peopling event occur. This book is an exploration into what we currently understand about the history of the peopling of the New World, the controversies that emerged over the decades, where the first Americans may have derived, what time they may have gotten here, and how we put together evidence to ascertain what we do know about these earliest people in the New World.
I guess when you first became really well known was, I don't know if it was 72 or 73, but you were leading some archaeology students from Pitt. So tell me that whole scenario and what you discovered.
I had just been hired at the University of Pittsburgh, and part of my function was to set up a multidisciplinary research program that would involve archaeologists, geologists, sedimentologists, experts in ancient plant and animal life, hopefully within striking distance of Pittsburgh, that would provide a venue to do two things: train students in state-of-the-art research protocols in those various areas, and simultaneously to do fundamental research in all of those areas. And since I didn't have the opportunity, because I had research commitments in the Mediterranean at the time, to go out and find a locus for this field school, I circulated word amongst my colleagues in the western part of the state, and a now deceased historian at California State College in California, Pennsylvania, told me about the site since named Meadowcroft rock shelter. I visited the site for the first time in April of 1973 for a variety of reasons, immediately sought permission from the requisite people to begin working there. And the excavations at that site managed to recover the longest occupational sequence in the New World. People have been living in that particular location off and on for more than 16,000 years. And so in one place, you could study the interplay between humans and their environment on a micro scale. And because the project was so heavily funded, we were able to do things there that have literally never been done again.
What was the nature of the rock shelter that made people go there for generations and generations?
The rock shelter sits high above a bank of a stream that's a natural avenue for populations of animals or humans moving from the Ohio River to the interior of Pennsylvania, or the other way. And anyone who might be in that area toward nightfall, for reasons that are apparent as soon as you see it, would have been likely to stay there. The overhang is, as I said, high and dry above the creek. Even when the creek floods, the rock shelter surface remains high and dry. The roof, the ceiling of the rock shelter, is 13 meters or so above the surface of the site, so that if you light a fire inside, the smoke is pretty rapidly and efficiently ventilated. The surface area inside is flat, so you can comfortably sit, stand, walk around. There's permanent drinking water available from the western and eastern edges of the site. The site opens to the south, so that in the daily traverse of the sun, the sandstone that makes up that cliff face retains heat. It makes it a more equable place to live during the colder parts of the fall and the spring. So all those natural attractants, plus its position on the strategic artery, is what would have led people to camp there, or for you to camp there if you were in the area.
So here you have one of your first excavations with Pitt, and you discover the oldest evidence of living people in North America. That must have been pretty exciting. How did you
Well,
react?
it was serendipitous, because all the early sites in North and South America have pretty much been discovered by mistake. In other words, people may have thought they were an archaeological site, but no one thought they were particularly old. And so essentially, when we found out it was as old as it turned out to be later on during the course of the excavations, frankly, no one believed it, because the conventional wisdom at the time said that no site should be that old, let alone one in the Upper Ohio Valley.
The fire pit told you the story, didn't it?
Well, there's a whole series of fireplaces there, and it just as you might camp there and ignite a fire at night to keep warm or to cook food, So did they off and on for 16,000 years. And charcoal from each one of those fire pits gives you the chronology of use of the site. And at the very bottom of the site, there's 11 or so fireplaces that date to between about 16,000 and 13,000 years ago that would represent the very first set of visitors.
Let's talk about your books, your first book.
Well, in essence, The First Americans was designed to explore this issue of what we understand about the initial peopling of the New World, why it's been so controversial, what lines of evidence we employ to look at it, and then it touches on things that I've written about either before or since that publication. When I arrived at the University of Utah as a graduate student in the late 1960s, they, meaning the University of Utah, had just gotten done excavating a dry cave or rock shelter located on the edge of the Great Salt Lake. Unlike sites here in the East, or most sites here in the East, the preservation in these kind of sites is exceptional. And so instead of just getting stone tools or just getting ceramics, you recover the whole panoply of equipment they may have used, their clothing, their sandals, their basketry, and you get a much better grasp on what they were doing than the sites back here normally offer. Now, it just so happened that at the time, no one at the University of Utah was an expert in the analysis of prehistoric basketry or related items, and this cave was full of these things. And so I was told by my mentor that either I would develop an expertise in this arena or pursue my education somewhere else. So I came to know and love baskets dearly, and it became a parallel career, which I've pursued in addition to everywhere else I've ever worked on other kinds of topics, something I've done ever since. And the first mass media book, I guess you could say, was a book on basketry technology, which is being reprinted this year. It's been in print since 1977. And it's really a manual that explains to both interested laypersons as well as professional archaeologists and craftspeople why basketry is such an important medium for understanding their ancient makers. And at the same time, it gives us insights into the theme of another book I did recently called The Invisible Sex, about what women are doing in prehistory, because we deal with an interesting archaeological bias when we recover only stone tools. Because of the tyranny of preservation, in most sites around the world, you get stone. If you're lucky, you get ceramics later in time. If you're particularly lucky, you may get some bone material or antler or some such similar thing. And very rarely, under special circumstances, you get perishables, things made out of plant fiber. You get sandals, you get clothing, you get baskets. Now, because even back in the middle of the 19th century, people were aware of the fact that the manufacture of stone tools was something normally associated with men, you were essentially recovering tools made only by men at archaeological sites everywhere, so they became differentially important. And we invented terms like the Stone Age and so forth to describe what we imagined to be a time when that's all people did. And because a lot of these stone tools were found intercalated with the remains of animals, we also got the idea that they were used to hunt and process animals, and so we became obsessed with the idea of man the hunter. We didn't seem to care much what either women, the young or the old of either sex were doing. It all focused on the activity of mature males. And so all these images in so many museums around the United States or in so many books are of men confronting beasts with stone tools. And because at least part of my career has been pivoting around things that men didn't make or normally make, because it's the other side of the economy, which in fact is the more important side of the economy. You know what happens if you decide to go out hunting in Western Pennsylvania these days. Take a few six-packs, go out, try and shoot a deer, while your wife and or significant other stays home, cooks and procures what you're actually going to eat, because you're going to come home with nothing. Well, prehistorically, it worked the same way. The vast bulk of what hunter-gatherers collect, eat, process, women collect and eat and process. And so the books that I've written have been about either the other gender and what they're really doing in antiquity, or they've been about the things they used, like baskets. And consequently, Meadowcroft having a little bit of each of those also shows us over a sweep of time what both genders are doing in the past in a way that a lot of sites don't.
Well, archaeology, of course, sounds like a very exciting career, and discoveries are exciting, but so much of it is probably just meticulous, tedious work, isn't it?
It is so profoundly dull that you have to be demented to be attracted to it or to stay in it. I mean, to give you an idea, when you're excavating at Meadowcroft, some of the layers that you excavate are thinner than the edge of the trowel that you're using to excavate. And so to remove them delicately over the layer upon which they lie, you have to use a single-edged razor blade. And since when we used to work at Meadowcroft, it was from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, you could only imagine standing with a single-edged razor blade all day long, peeling off something that's as thin as a couple of book pages, and then you can fully appreciate why those that were of the appropriate age were pleased with the fact that Avella had 7 fully functioning saloons at the time to which we could easily retreat after one of those kind of days. And most archaeology lab work is like that. It's not these eureka moments where suddenly some overwhelming discovery sweeps over you. It normally is something that you arrive at in a very tedious fashion, and it has a huge, dull, boring aspect to it.
So why do you like it so much?
I like it because we borrow from both within and outside the field technologies and protocols to allow us to understand better what our ancestors were doing in the past. I'm interested in the methodological aspects of it. What kind of equipment that you might borrow from organic chemistry analyses, or what kind of equipment that you might borrow from geophysics, or what kind of equipment has emerged within the field itself to better let us understand what your parents or my parents might have done 100,000 generations ago. What we do is no different than what a forensic scientist does now, except that our crime scene is 100,000 years old or 1,000,000 years old in some cases. And so the kind of protocols we use to ferret out that kind of information are exceptionally complicated and nowadays exceptionally expensive. And if you don't stay out on the cutting edge, you very quickly are bypassed by the sweep of new things that you can use, and you end up being very limited in what you can say about the past.
Any future books or future explorations coming up?
Well, I think in the recent past, we've been working on the submerged continental shelf in the Gulf of Mexico. And as you might know, every time there's a major glacial moment in North America, sea level around the world drops precipitately. And during the height of the last glacial period, when the ice was near Butler, Pennsylvania, basically, and the ice over Erie was 2 miles thick, sea level had dropped more than 300 feet. And so the coastline of Florida, for instance, was 100 miles out into the Gulf. And what we're looking at are those submerged coastlines, especially in terms of where the modern Florida rivers intersect the coast, because on those intersection points there should be early archaeological sites. And so we've been funded by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency to look for those sites. We've already spent 2 years out there. For obvious reasons, we didn't go back last summer because of the oil incident in the Gulf. We're going back again next summer and the following summer to actually excavate some of the locations we found. Anecdotally, we know the material is out there because fishermen have pulled up mammoth tusks, or dredges have pulled up early projectile points and other impedimenta of early humans. So we're investigating a landscape that no one has walked on for 20,000 years. I think, in a sense, the story that we're trying to tell through all of these books, and essentially the story of what all archaeologists are trying to tell, is how we ended up where we are now, both technologically, socially, environmentally, because, as you've heard the old saw, you can't know where you're going in the future unless you know where you've been in the past. Well, it really is true. And now we understand better how to figure out where we were. And so those are the kinds of things I write about in technical articles, and these are the kind of things that these more popularized books address, how archaeologists piece together the story of where we've been.